All right, friends, I want to give a warning about a woman, an author. Her name is Gail Ripplinger. Now, let me tell you about my introduction to Gail Ripplinger was when I was in Bible college. There's two things I want to say. I was interested in the Bible translation debate, and there was a book called New Age Bible Versions. And I read it, and there was a lot of documentation. I was like, whoa, I can't believe all this stuff. And then I was talking to somebody at the Bible college, and I was asking them about whether or not studying Hebrew and Greek was profitable or not when to study the Bible. And my friend, this person I talked to, he said, well, I learned a little bit of Greek, and he basically told me it wasn't worth my time. And then he gave me this book, Hazardous Materials. And I started to read this book, and let's talk about it. So, let's talk about Gail Ripplinger. So, Gail Ripplinger has a very questionable character. Okay, now I'm not one of these people where, if somebody has a disagreement with me about some doctrine or something, that I throw out their work or whatever. That's not how I am. I prefer to let people's work stand on their own. However, the problem with Gail Ripplinger is there's very serious questions about her honesty. Okay? So, for example, and we're going to look at some articles, but Gail Ripplinger, according to D.A. Waite, she had been divorced and remarried 3 times, which is whatever. That happens. That doesn't mean you can't write truth about things, okay? But the bigger issue is that she, according to D.A. Waite, she lied to him about it. Now, if you don't know who D.A. Waite is, D.A. Waite has written many books defending the King James Version. He started the Dean Burgon Society, which is dedicated to defending the King James Version. And D.A. Waite used to be associated with Gail Ripplinger and used to promote her material. And then he found out she lied about her divorces, and he cut ties with her. You'll see here on my screen a couple articles from David Cloud here. And I'm going to turn my wife off so I don't get any interruptions. Sorry. David Cloud is a King James onlyist, and he has written several articles about issues that he's perceived with Gail Ripplinger. Okay, so Gail Ripplinger is very common. I've visited many churches. I've been in many pastors' offices, and a lot of times I'll see New Age Bible Versions and Hazardous Materials by Gail Ripplinger on the wall. And so she's very influential. Beware of her. Let's talk about some things, okay? These are a lot of these criticisms I tell you are coming from people who also defend the King James Version, okay? So one of the problems is like this book is essentially what this book is that how you can't trust any Hebrew or Greek study materials. You can't trust, she talks about Strong's Concordance, Vine's Expository Dictionary, Thayer's Greek Lexicon, Moulton's, Vincent, West Word Studies, Brown Driver Briggs, BDAG, which is Greek Lexicon, has its root in Frederick Danker, Scott and Little. She's going to trash on all Greek texts, including the Trinitarian Bible Society, Textus Receptus. And basically what she's doing is she's casting down on all Hebrew and Greek study materials. Now, one of the interesting things about Gail Ripplinger is she doesn't know Hebrew and Greek, which you'll see that in one of the articles that we talk about, that we read. She has a really bad habit. One of the big things is she takes people out of context. And I'm going to make this statement, and I fully believe it, and I don't feel any hesitation in saying it. I believe Gail Ripplinger is a slanderer. I believe she slanders people. If you look at some of the things she said, it's really hard not to think that she's unaware of what she's doing. Maybe she really is, but it's just she slanders people. I'm not sure if she's doing it on purpose or not, but Gail Ripplinger slanders people. So, for example, she has a quote in about one of the NIV translators. I am not an NIV proponent. I don't encourage people to use the NIV. I'm not a critical text advocate. But Gail Ripplinger took a quote from an NIV translator in a commentary on the Gospel of John. And she made it appear like he denied the deity of Jesus, and she was like, "See, this NIV translator didn't believe in the deity." But then, if you look at the whole quote, he was doing the opposite. There's places where, and it's been years ago, and I'm like 85% sure on this, but I'm pretty sure that I've seen instances where she's literally takes two separate quotes about somebody that have nothing to do with each other, and then removes different parts and splices them together to basically attack this person. And you'll see, we'll talk about that. So the thing about Gail Ripplinger is, like, if you were to read her book, New Age Bible Versions or Hazardous Materials, the information is very well presented, and there's a lot. Like, this is a really thick book. This is over 1,000 pages here, okay? And the actual layout of the material is, it's very well put together in terms of organization. And what she does is there's a lot of a scholarly appearance. Okay, so like on every page, typically there are multiple quotes from many different people. And what she does is she bombards you with all these quotes and information, and she presents her work as like this very scholarly work, and you kind of read it like, whoa, this lady's really done her research, and she overloads you with information. And it's a lot of information. The problem is a lot of it is misleading, and you can't even trust it. Like, if you weren't, like, I'm sure there are things in her books that are good and right. The problem is, like, anytime she quotes something, I personally wouldn't trust her. I would have to go check every single quote and look at the primary resource because of how frequently she appears to take people out of context. And she comes up with wild things, and her logic is really bad and things like that. Her book is essentially her tactics, in at least in Hazardous Materials. It's a lot of ad hominem. So, hey, did you know this person believed this, and this person was associated with this person, and this person believed this, and they were associated with this person who was associated with this person who believed this, and and this person they had this problem, and this person they had this problem, and then then kind of what you get through, she goes through all these different people, trashes on like anybody who's ever produced like any Greek or Hebrew study tool or material, and it's like you can't trust any of them, is basically. She attacks all lexicons, which is interesting because, if people in the 1600s believed what Gail Riplinger taught today, there would be no King James Bible because it would never been translated. Here's a book called The History of New Testament Lexicography. It's a history of New Testament lexicons. And when I read this, in the 1600s, Greek and Hebrew were not living languages. They were still studied and learned. And the King James translators would have studied and learned them. And they would have used Greek lexicons. And I think in their day, a lot of the lexicons would have been like Latin lexicons. So like Latin, Hebrew, Latin, Greek, things like that. And the King James translators learned Greek and Hebrew from teachers. God didn't zap them from heaven with Greek and Hebrew knowledge. They had to learn. Just like any other human being learns things. Right? And so it's just interesting. Gail Riplinger is anti-Greek and Hebrew. Okay? Doesn't think you should look at Greek and Hebrew at all. You should, and she'll be like, we're using all these uninspired dictionaries. Which is crazy because, Noah Webster's 1828 dictionary is not inspired either, and people still use that, and she has, for example, in her book, she has a whole thing about how, she's like, Greek lexicons, their definitions are copyrighted, and so, you have to change the definitions in order to get copyrights. That's ridiculous. You apply that to English dictionaries. Does that mean you can't trust any English dictionary? And that's not how copyrights work. Okay, typically, in order to really avoid copyright issues, you just have to not blatantly plagiarize large sections of material. If the word theos, for example, really means God, and you put in your lexicon it means God, you're not going to get struck with a copyright infringement just because other lexicons already say that. So just like one problem, the way that copyrights work, Gail Riplinger doesn't understand, and a lot of people don't understand. In fact, with copywriting, people are like, oh, you got to change so much of whatever to get a copyright. That's not really how copyrights work. There's no actually defined number on how much things you have to change. Anyway, that's a side note, but so Gail Riplinger is like, hey, all these resources, they got problems. They're put together by people with problems. The problem is Gail Riplinger has problems. So should we throw her book out? We could use the Gail Ripplinger method against Gail Ripplinger. I mean, hey, Gail Ripplinger's been divorced 3 times. Hey, she lied to D.A. Wade. Hey, do you know there's a lot of churches that would have Gail Ripplinger, I don't know if she still does, but there are a lot of people where Gail Ripplinger would go to churches, get in behind pulpits, and teach about this issue. And a lot of people have a problem with that because the Bible says a woman's not supposed to teach a man nor usurp authority over a man. And yet a lot of Baptist pastors were giving their pulpit to Gail Ripplinger to come in and teach about this kind of stuff. Okay? According to D.A. Wade, Gail Ripplinger threatened to file a lawsuit against him because she claimed he was slandering her, which I don't believe is true, and you'll see why. But anyway, if we took Gail Ripplinger's model of dealing and determining which resources are reliable and trustworthy, we would have to reject the King James Bible because the King James Bible was done by Anglicans who they all, in 1604, King James, I think he signed a canon, which would mean that the King James translators and others would have had to agree to the Book of Common Prayer and the 39 Articles of the Anglican Church and agree that they were in harmony with the Word of God. The Book of Common Prayer and 39 Articles of the Anglican Church teach baptismal regeneration. The King James translators all would have believed in infant baptism. There's like at least 6 King James translators, from what I've read by an article by David Cloud, that 6 of the King James translators approved of and supported the persecution of separatists in England, or nonconformists, which would have been like Baptists. How about that? And then a lot, if not all of the King James translators were Calvinist. So do we throw their work out? I don't know. I don't say that, but I'm just saying that the Gail Ripplinger model of evaluating things, if you took that and applied to the King James, you'd have to throw the King James out. Okay? Her method is severely flawed. Okay? Let's go through some of these articles just to give you an idea. So here's an article by David Cloud from his website, Way of Life, The Problem with New Age Bible Versions. Notice he says misquoting and poor documentation. So she's read it. She said it's so marred by, David Cloud said, New Age Bible versions so marred by error, carelessness, and faulty logic, it cannot be used as a dependable resource. Look here, you can pause and read this. This is the thing about Edwin Palmer that I was talking to you about, which, by the way, James White did this, and I don't agree with James White, okay, on a lot of things, like the text of the New Testament, but in 1993, he was on a radio program where him and Gail Ripplinger went back and forth, and he confronted her about this, and she literally just didn't even really respond. And I would recommend watching this. I'll put a link to this in the description, okay? But, so here's some other things. You can look at these. You can look at this. This is the full quote that she took out of context, and here's some other stuff where, like you can see where he's accusing her of taking this guy Wolf out of context. Here's another one. She claims the NIV editor admits that some characters appeared to appear from the text, and then she goes, is it any wonder Westcott said David is not a chronological person? So she's saying that, Walker is saying that David didn't exist. Walker is just talking about different translations of certain names. He's not talking about these men literally not existing. While Westcott is actually questioning the historicity of the names. And she tries to get... there's a lot that you can go through here. He says that she has some errors of fact. Like, for example, she says Dean Burgon was a dissenting scholar on the Greek New Testament Committee. That is not true. Dean Burgon was not on the New Testament Greek Committee of the Revised Version in 1881. He was not. Okay? So... and you can go... I'm not going to go through all this. Like, one of the things is she said David Hunt endorsed her book, and she used him as an endorsement. And he's like, I never endorsed your book. So anyway, you can see some of this. Talks about her divorce. And then David Cloud standing by some things. Okay, so here's another one. What about Gail Ripplinger's new book? This is talking about hazardous materials, where he goes through hazardous materials. And he talks about this. So notice again what he says. Mrs. Ripplinger gives so much documentation that the average reader is convinced her scholarship is sound. Not being in a position to see, she frequently misuses her quotes and reaches conclusions not supported by the facts. So again, most people who read Gail Ripplinger's book do not go check her quotes. And a lot of people that might not think you have reason. People say they trust her. The problem, one of the problems that we can fall into is if somebody is teaching a position we agree with, we're not as critical with them. And that's it. So here's an article where 2009 about Gail Ripplinger's lies to D.A. Wade. So D.A. Wade says he was informed that by uncertified documents sent to her that Gail Ripplinger had 3 husbands and 2 divorces. He talked to her, and Gail Ripplinger said she only had 1 marriage. And then D.A. Wade was asked about it again. And then, so D.A. Wade himself went and requested the copies from the divorces and that they were genuine. So you can actually, here's a website where you can see these divorce records. Like you can see are the marriage records and things like that. Okay? And you can see the divorce records. Okay, some of them are not showing up anymore. But you can actually go, D.A. Wade actually contacted the courthouse and he actually certified this claim himself. And he found that Gail Ripplinger had lied. Okay? So that was that. And there's a lot. You can read I'll put these articles in there. And then here's one. In Gail Ripplinger's book Hazardous Materials, she said that no knowledge of Greek or Hebrew is required to read this book. I've done all the Greek work for the reader. But Gail Ripplinger doesn't know she doesn't know Hebrew and Greek. She hasn't studied it. According to D.A. Wade, she admitted in a May 1994 interview that she can't read Greek or Hebrew. But she's going to be an authority on Hebrew and Greek resources. That's crazy. Gail Ripplinger's made, she's claimed, that the Lord miraculously brought her the needed materials and resources for her books. But, the Lord, just says weird things that are like, she claims, okay, here. You could just read this. Where she claims that basically God told her to write this book and, whatever, things like that. So she compares herself to Ezekiel getting a revelation from God. Anyway, so this is about Gail Ripplinger. Beware of Gail Ripplinger. I would stay far, 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 far away from Gail Ripplinger and her book, Hazardous Materials and New Age Bible Versions. And there's a lot of people that are repeating her thing. There's a lot of people out there that have read this book and have rejected all Hebrew and Greek tools and lexicons and dictionaries. And it's fortunate because Gail Ripplinger is not reliable. Okay? And Greek and Hebrew study is a good thing. There's so much that you can be sharpened in your understanding of your English Bible by, looking at Greek and Hebrew and, all sorts of things. Anyway, so I just wanted to give this warning. A lot of people don't know. Beware of Gail Ripplinger.